The local people in New Mexico, the Pueblo Indians, the other tribal people, called her a bruja, a sorceress, and they stayed away. They wanted nothing to do with her. It was top security. But Georgia O'Keeffe could come and go without problem. She was given free access at the main gate. But this stuff is really serious and it's high level. And it's about changing the world, changing humanity. It's not this kind of like, and then I'll get money. This is much more about incredible powers at their disposal.
How are you doing after our last talk? Then how are you feeling about it?
Look, yeah, I mean a lot because I guess I keep quite a low profile, and I'm always a bit shocked by some of the meanness out there in interweb. And yet,
Hmm.
of course, most of your audience and the people who follow you and your work are just delightful, are just lovely and encouraging and positive. And I'm so grateful for their encouragement. And I'm kind of just dealing with, getting a bit thicker skin maybe about some of that negative stuff. But really, I guess we sort of expect some of it because some of this material is new and art is a bit of a golden calf, isn't it? People don't want it, they want to see it as this standalone, it all happens within a frame or within the object and not realizing that it belongs in the world. It connects with
Hmm.
the world. It's made in the world, it's dialogue in the world. And I guess that's what we're really interested in here is looking into the artwork. And we're only showing artwork that we have a certain respect for. We're not, I'm not talking about at this kind of length about artists that I think are worthless. So I'm not criticizing in a sense, the art object. The point is they come from somewhere. And when I made the comment last time about, that maybe imagination is overrated, that art comes from observation, it comes from deep thinking, it comes from connection with the world. This is where we come in and kind of can read back, I think, some of those connections that, as we know, are not shown to us, are not revealed to us. The world is not as it appears. We take a while to work that out, or sometimes with a jolt, that the world just doesn't work the way we're sort of told it does. And then
Hmm.
we start to go looking and we start to ask questions. And I guess my role is kind of to open up some of those questions and to get other people thinking. People are getting very good now, I think, at looking at symbolism, for example, and occult symbolism, was just, went over most people's heads about 20 years ago, and so many more people are waking up to that. But let's look even deeper and let's ask questions. And what I have today in talking about Georgia O'Keeffe is really going to send us down some pretty deep rabbit holes. And a lot of those rabbit holes I can't have a definitive answer for, but I think I have very strong evidence and have certain speculations and certain questions that I think, you and your audience will have input on, will have thoughts about. But I'm presenting things that I don't think have been presented elsewhere. That's what I see as my contribution in the whole, dialogue, debate, and thought processes that we're all going through. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, like I said, I wouldn't worry too much about the negative comments on the previous thing, and it's probably not worth dwelling on, to be honest. And I said, well, let's move on today onto the next one, the next topic. Um, I think most people who listened to what we had to present last time understood that we were coming at this from a completely different angle than they would have heard in a gallery from somebody giving them a tour, or what the
For
lecturer would
sure.
have told them
Yeah.
in class, or what the art history books would have told them through biographies and autobiographies of the like. It's kind of, these are quite literally contrarian to the mainstream viewpoint and understanding, the, let's call it, the exoteric interpretation of most pieces of artwork. For example, the kiss, a beautiful symbol of love and connectivity as seen by most of the public. But
Mm.
when you actually just look into it in context to history, it is a literal representation of Apollo raping Daphne. And that's not
Mm.
even just speculation. That is what it was
Mm.
called when it was first exhibited. That is what it actually represents. But then, obviously, most people who had issues, they were literally just arguing a fiction they'd made up in their minds about what they think it was actually about. And all we did was tell them, no, it is literally this. And
Mm.
again, most people get arts, the whole artist subjective attitude, which permeates most of modern art and schools, shall we say, that it's your interpretation that counts, not the literal thing the artist meant when he actually created it. And I think a lot of people don't like that. We're saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be looking at it so personally. Maybe we should actually just be looking at what they were actually doing in their time and what they actually really meant, what they were saying, and not make idols out of pieces of artwork or artists necessarily. Because I agree with what you said. We're not exactly like putting these people down as though they had no talents or
Mm.
didn't have deep
Yeah.
thoughts or perhaps weren't, contributing something to art in general.
Mm.
We're not saying that. We're not saying they were necessarily even evil,
Mm.
or
Mhm.
anything
Mhm.
like that. I think a lot of people assume that that's what we were doing because we questioned the original interpretation.
Yeah.
And today we're just going to continue on the same vein and do the same thing. And
Yes.
again, most people
Yeah.
appreciate what you do, Susan, and so do I. And I feel like I learn something every time you speak. So, what
Oh,
have you got
good.
for me? Let's go.
All right. Well, let's go. So I'll share the screen now to yeah, Georgia O'Keeffe, which who I think she may not be as well known in England, in Europe, in Australia. I mean, pretty well known, but really, really, really well known in America, and seen as well one of the great, if not I would say second greatest female artist of the 20th century, second
Mm,
perhaps to Louise Bourgeois, the sculptor. So I would just say she's that significant in art in America, and for a number of reasons, which be going into in a minute. She's called the mother of American modernism. That's how kind of how big her reputation is.
mm,
And best known for these flower paintings, some desert landscapes as well, associated with female sexuality and female form, which we'll talk about, but we'll also see that she denies, because she protested that they were about, that it was in any way about female eroticism or female form. So that's her there. Just a couple, we'll be coming back to these in a minute, but just to remind people what they look like. Um, this one's not a particularly big painting. A lot of her paintings became larger, so 47 by 76 centimetres. This is a bit larger, but increasingly as time went on, they were quite a lot larger. Um, I have to say that even when I knew her work, when I first perhaps saw her work when I was in art school, I thought, well, they're very nice. You know, they are very nice, and she's got skill. I mean, I'm not a painter, so this kind of skill with a brush and with form is of course admirable, but I really didn't understand what the fuss was about. I didn't think that she was that significant. I didn't put her up there with, and we're going to talk about Picasso another time, and again, love hate, we're going to talk
mhm,
about some deep things about him, but up there with Warhol, Picasso, you name it. But that she's seen as this kind of idol in America, especially amongst women and women artists. And you could see already that there's a very sort of sexual, fleshy, vulvic, gynecological almost references, some more than others, but they're painted,
mhm,
the petals and so on are really painted flesh-like, and the detail, the scrutiny, the close-up attention is, of course, a sense of intimacy. When people read this as erotic symbols of female form, she really denied that, and she has said that in a few interviews that she protested. They're talking about their own affairs. I didn't, I didn't put that there. I kind of find this hard to accept, really, to accept that this is
mhm.
just our projection. She said, I'm just making you look at something that I saw up close, all your associations, it's your trip, your flowers. But I think, look, come on, come on, get a grip. There are
It's
other ways to paint a flower.
it does feel kind of gaslighty, doesn't it? Like, oh no, you're crazy. No,
Crazy.
it's I've not painted a vagina. You're talking absolute nonsense. This is quite
Yeah.
clearly just a flower up close. What's wrong with you?
Mm.
You some kind of pervert? It's definitely like it feels like
Yeah.
a narcissist gaslighting technique. Is kind of like
Yes.
Yeah, a bit
Yeah.
on the nose, if you ask me.
Yeah. And can you imagine? I mean, this is an early one, 1926. There really wasn't much like that at the time. If people were
Mm,
still probably in the tradition of, those beautiful botanical paintings and drawings of flowers, Victorian,
mm,
collecting of flowers. So it was kind of fairly out there at work. And remembering that if you talk to a biologist, of course, they say, yes, the flowers are the sex organs of a plant.
mhm,
They're even named in association with human parts. Um, and,
mhm,
they're definitely, I mean, that's how a plant reproduces through whether it's by pollen or seed or, the various ways that flowering plants reproduce.
mhm,
Um, I just want to remind people too that there's certainly, we see this kind of association with flowers and sexuality in Robert Mapplethorpe's photographs of the 1980s. And I don't know if you're sort of, around or kind of remember the kerfuffle around this. So he was openly, gay, leading a very, let's say, very active lifestyle. And his presentations of flowers they're sort of smallish works. They're intimate works, so more like 8 by 10, that kind of smaller size, 10 by 12 inch photographs, and they're very sexualized, but very in a way presenting sort of male form in these flowers. And I've just got on the right a few examples of other work that he was doing at the time, which is extremely overt BDSM, usually homoerotic sexual photographs. I mean, really extreme practices that I think a lot of people didn't quite believe were so popular, like fisting and, as I
mm,
said, leather and rubber and, fetishism, basically. So he was really doing this for the male. The interesting thing was he showed in the gallery, when he was showing them, one side of the gallery would be all of these flowers in, masculine kind of associations, and on the other side would be these extremely hardcore, but beautifully lit, beautifully presented, beautifully printed male sexual photographs.
mm.
And I mean, really, really, you know, this is now not a flower, but it's one of O'Keeffe's. It's open clam shell. I think, oh,
Mm.
wow. I just
Yeah.
think I think if you showed it to any gynecologist, they wouldn't miss it. Um, so yeah. I mean, they're all about close scrutiny for sure. Now, just to be
Mm.
clear, Georgia O'Keeffe, we'll see, was married to Alfred Stieglitz for a lot of her life, and they didn't always live together. She had many bisexual affairs. She had long sexual relationships with people, including Mabel Dodge Lewin, who was extremely wealthy and influential heiress who lived in Taos in New Mexico, which is where Georgia ended up. And the Taos community, which included what some people say was perhaps a coven, let's be frank, of women who were gathered there to ostensibly be studying the Pueblo Indian culture. The interesting thing
Mm.
was that the Pueblo Indians stayed away from these people. And just reminding people too that she had a long affair with Paul Strand's, Rebecca Strand, Paul Strand's wife, Rebecca Strand. And up there on the right, she also had an affair with Frida Kahlo when Frida visited her in New York. So
Mm.
she definitely, I'm just saying she's definitely sort of, interested in female sexuality from both viewpoints. As I said, she early in her life, she came from a sort of I think Wisconsin. I've just forgotten, gone a blank. Came to New York and pretty shortly became connected with Alfred Stieglitz, who ran something called the 291 Gallery, that is famous for first exhibiting a lot of these modernists from Europe, Matisse, Duchamp, Brancusi, etc.
Mm.
And this was breakthrough stuff. I mean, it was not popular at the time. It was not understood at the time. He also showed photography as fine art, and that was a first too. Photography was not seen as an art form, and he was a really significant early promoter of that. And he was a very early photographic artist himself. And, that's all by the by, and that probably deserves another rabbit hole looking into him. But they were married for a long time, but her its sort of breakthrough into New York society was immediate and successful through her connection with Stieglitz.
Mm. It's not what you know,
She's
it's who
seen
you know, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And
Absolutely.
also just the entry, just like that sort of entry, and here I am. All right, now I'll have a solo show at the Brooklyn Museum. You
Yeah.
just think, that doesn't happen so often, does it?
No.
So she's seen as well, there's one thing is her artwork, which is, well, I'm showing she did other things, landscapes and so on, we'll be seeing, but it's these flower paintings that are her iconography. Uh, she was a very independent woman, very outspoken, very strong-willed. She and Stiglitz had they sort of had an open relationship, as I said, and were argumentative, and she stood up for her rights. So she's seen as a feminist icon and an early proponent of modernism, like going her own way,
Mm.
breaking all the rules. And say it takes a lot of courage, and I do believe this. It takes to create a world in the arts does take courage. You have to be prepared to put up with a lot of rubbish and naysaying. You have to have a long, strong sense of urge to create. She's
Mm.
also seen as a fashion icon and a lifestyle influencer. We'll come to that in a minute, but even now, her homes in Abiquiu and Santa Fe have been turned into museums. So we sort of have access to where she lived, the objects that she surrounded herself with. And she was an early proponent of what you'd call the, sort of homegrown movement, making her own
Mm.
clothes, very healthy foods, making juices. She was making smoothies before anyone else. She wrote cookbooks. She was very, very minimalist, beautifully clear lined natural elements in her homes. And of course, this was a break from the sort of consumerism that most people were into at the time. So she sort of was very appealing to the hippies of the 1960s and onwards. And I mean, I just think, there's a certain graceful elegance to just about everything she did. So that's her
Mm.
bottom right there, cooking up one of her stews.
Mm.
So Keith Walsh, that's right, she was born in Wisconsin, moved to New York, married Stiglitz, set up in New York very quickly, um, started spending her summers in New Mexico, which is kind of bizarre because it must have been, you know, I was going to swear then, very hot in
Mm-hmm.
Mexico in the summer. In 1940, she bought something called Ghost Ranch, which I'll show you in a map in a little while, and another house in Abiquiu. And these are quite important because she painted the landscapes there. You can see the mesa in the background that she would often paint. The house that she bought was called Ghost Ranch before she bought it because it was associated with hauntings, with strange apparitions. I don't know that it was quite Skinwalker Ranch, but it had some of those characteristics. People
Mm.
didn't want to be around it. The local people did not want to have anything to do with it. But she bought that and then built another house nearby. So I've got some little asides here. So here's the map. Can you see where she is up top on left of the map, Ghost Ranch?
Mm-hmm.
And the mountain that she painted a lot, Cerro Pedernal. That's just what I showed there. There's Abiquiu, so close by a house that she then bought, and which we've often seen in the interior shots of her.
Mm.
And that's very close to, on the right-hand side there, that's Santa Fe, or down the bottom right corner, Santa Fe. And over there towards middle is Los Alamos. So remembering Los Alamos was the great site for the testing of the A bomb. So
Mm.
the Los Alamos National Laboratory. And, that's about an hour in the car, maybe less. But, of course, you can't do direct routes because there's incredible mountains and difficult terrain, but less than an hour away. And as it turns out, she spent a lot of time at Los Alamos,
Mm.
which is just unbelievable. Can you imagine the security around Los Alamos? So this is the testing of the nuclear bomb, the Manhattan Project, complete secrecy. This is the race to end the war with this, nuclear device, Oppenheimer and so on.
Mm.
And they're all, doing all of their theoretical planning in New York. And then they had to find a site to do some actual testing of the Trinity bomb. But the security was unbelievable. Nobody came and went from that. I mean, you can see it looks a bit And that's it more recently. But there would be nobody coming and going, no journalists, no even extra military if it wasn't needed. Everybody who worked on that site lived there. Well, we haven't shown it, but there's these little huts. They made if you've seen the film, I'm not that I'm saying, there's always very much accuracy in the film, but you get a sense that these little prefab houses where families had to live there. The women, remember those incredible women they called computers, so who did all the calculations, lived on site, stayed on site, never left the site. It was top security. But Georgia O'Keeffe could come and go without problem. She was given free access at the main gate. That's just weird.
Well, that doesn't make any
Very,
sense at all, does it?
not
Why
really.
would some artist who's obsessed with painting questionable
Flowers.
flowers be allowed access to extremely high security atom bomb testing facility like
Yes,
that?
yes,
I'll let you go
yes,
on with that one, but that
yeah,
raises many red flags immediately for me. But go
doesn't
ahead.
it? Yeah. So that bottom right, that's a still from the movie, but you can just see what's his name? Syrian. Oh, I've forgotten the actor's name. He did a good job. I thought he's a very strong actor, but he really
Hmm.
looks like they do manage always to get people who look like the original person that they play,
Hmm.
and that was a very good likeness. So that's Oppenheimer, the father of the bomb, who's set up the laboratory, who did all of the major physics in the
Hmm.
planning of the bomb. So she moved 1940. The actual laboratory was up and running by 1943.
Hmm.
So just
It-
just to put it as back, I'm not suggesting a romantic connection with them. Well, I don't know, but I'm not because I mean it was a good 20 years younger. It's just that makes it even weirder. If they were an item, I could maybe understand why she was allowed to sneak in. I don't think that's what was going on at all.
Well, who
Mm.
knows? Who really knows? But I mean, just on this is a side tangent again. I'll try to keep it relatively short. But it's there's another subcategory within the conspiracy realm that have the understanding that nuclear bombs aren't actually real. They're a complete myth. They don't really exist, and the threat of them existing has been created to put fear into the public, basically, for many reasons, to justify many different things. Now, we're not saying big bombs don't exist, but they're
Yeah.
saying basically the whole idea that nuclear weaponry is like
Fission,
a
yes.
it's like a serious threat to humanity,
Yeah.
and it's kind of actually a lot less than what they're trying to make it out to be. And if they obviously just a complete side note tangent theory here, nothing major, but if she was if some random artist was capable of coming onto this site to talk with the man creating this thing on a regular basis, with free pass to come and go, perhaps it adds a little bit of credence to the idea that it actually was much to do about nothing, and perhaps Oppenheimer wasn't really doing much at this place other than keeping up appearances more than anything.
Who knows? Yeah.
If there's any credence to that idea that they actually weren't really building weapons of mass destruction at all, but
Yes.
well, perhaps that's just something for the movies. But the
Yeah.
reality is
We,
they were just hanging out in underground bunkers with famous artists and doing who knows what for fun to pass the day,
yeah.
But there we
Yeah.
go. That's just a random side tangent there.
It's true. Look, we don't really know. There's something going on, but we also know that, just to be clear to people, the mushroom cloud can be produced by large enough quantities of TNT will produce a
Yeah.
mushroom cloud. That's not unique to nuclear fission. So, okay, something's going on, but we don't really know. She was such good friends with him that he got her to build a fallout shelter. So there's her fallout shelter on the right, the entrance, and that's just all the instructions for turn, switch left to zero, adjust meter. I don't know that it's much better than ducking under a table
It
if
doesn't
this
look
was
like
really
it, does it?
when not when the explosion would have been like 30, 10 miles
Hmm.
just down the road. But anyway, she was definitely encouraged to have one of those. The
Hmm.
interesting thing about why they chose Los Alamos, the site was something that was familiar to Oppenheimer, the territory, was because he had gone to school there.
Ah.
And it was an elite boarding school, a very, very odd place, an enrollment of, 40 or so boys, young, I suppose you'd say high school age boys, who would live there and lead a kind of a ranch life. You can see them looking a bit Boy Scouty, and it was all about
Hmm.
team building. And, we just, as we know, goodness knows what else, because they're a real elect alumni. I mean, some of the people, of course, they're names that you and I, wouldn't mean much because they became captains of industry and so on, who, that we don't particularly recognise their
Hmm.
name, but there sure are enough that we do. So, please, including people like Gore Vidal and William S. Burroughs.
Oh, interesting.
And so a lot of people who we can sort of see as forwarding, the agenda for all the many arms and sort of, rabbit
Hmm.
holes that involves, but many people who had quite important controlling and cultural as well as, political
Yeah,
uh,
Burroughs
place
was
in
a name
society.
that spoke to me. That he wrote The
Yeah,
Naked Lunch. Is that correct? Am I
that's
thinking of the
right.
right guy?
Yes, and he
Yeah.
was, yeah, from the IBM family who kept all the records of the Jews during the Holocaust, whose
Hmm.
records were sold to the Mormon Church, by the way. There's it
What?
gets rabbit holes, right?
If it's one after
Yeah,
another, they're all in it together. It's all one giant weird connected networked cult. Is It's all very odd.
yeah.
And so
It's
that's
very odd.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the famous quote, which is used in the movie too,
Hmm.
Oppenheimer was quite, that he was presented as quite a literary person, which was true, but he was also very into Hindu mythology, Hindu gods. And as the
Hmm.
bomb was exploding, he said, "Now I've become death, the destroyer of worlds." And this comes from the Bhagavad Gita, and I think it's Shiva. This is my ignorance. It's Shiva saying this, and it's about becoming enlightened. So not just about, I mean, we read it as, well, has he got death in his hands now, this weapon that could, destroy humanity? And it may well be true, but it's also just, I have become enlightened, and now the world can see my glory.
Hmm.
That's also it. But this is what he said at the time. And if there is an atom to be split, there's nobody can prove atoms. I'm just saying they're a lovely idea. We can't prove atoms. Science tells us all these things are above, above complication. But if it is, it's definitely something to do with our chemical, primer materia, getting down to the reducing. So what do we call it? An atom, and it's a physical or like an electronic charged particle, or it's a kind of a magic primer materia. I don't really know.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. So she did paintings that absolutely, I'd say on the left, you really sort of feel as though have a connection with the experimentation at Los Alamos. And some of them are called her Black Place paintings, in which, you can see there's the sort of tearing of space and this destructive, shadowy element.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
So are those in that painting though? They let's say the same mountainscapes.
Yes,
Um.
they start with the same mountains. That's right. Literally the
Yeah.
landscape in which it would have taken place. Yeah.
Hmm.
And yet she's done this sort of, kind of crack in reality, really, which is not really,
It looks like
doesn't really present it.
lightning, really, in a way, coming
It
down from
does.
heaven. And
More
I
like
can't help
a
but get
weapon.
illusions. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's got like a point to barb at the end, like a hook as well. And
Yes.
it reminds me something similar to the Lucifer falling from heaven like lightning type
Ah,
of thing.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
do believe Manly P. Hall was talking about creativity specifically, and he says having the seething powers of Lucifer running through our hands is the way he kind of
Oh,
described it.
wow.
A prolific Freemason, and
Yeah.
I do feel like there may be some kind of reference here to creativity,
Interesting.
destruction,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
power, creativity itself. Because again, and again, this is just me wildly speculating with no basis for anything I'm about to say. But if it was all a fiction, including the atom bomb and what they've created, well, they've created a fiction that they intend to make people believe. And that itself is the seething power of Lucifer running through their hands, the creativity itself.
Very
So there's
powerful.
something interesting. And again, that's maybe I'm reading too much into that. That doesn't
No, I
actually
think that's
exist.
very interesting. I hadn't thought
Mm.
about that. I had thought that it may connect with, as we see Zeus, the entity
Mm.
that we call the deity that we call Zeus, was always associated with directed energy weapons. And that also, I
Ah.
mean, whether the other fallen angels, Lucifer, etc. And as you say, the sort of spark of creativity, but it's in this case seemingly a destructive force. But
Mm.
also, I suppose we could dwell on this a bit because if this is a sort of, it's a very would you say, seductive? It's painting the sublime as not only terrible but
Mm,
beautiful, isn't it? It's like both, extremely powerful, but the destruction itself is something, well, beautiful. So
hmm
if we associate this with the flower paintings, there's something, is there more destruction going on in those than simply admiration? Anyway, we might have to come
mm,
back on that. So why did he call it Trinity? Why did Oppenheimer, who was in charge of the whole thing, uh, the story goes, it may have even come from an interview that he said it came from a John Donne sonnet, so 1609, and it talks about batter my heart, three-personed God, and so the Trinity of God. Now let's be really clear: never at any time in Oppenheimer's life was he associated with Christianity. Never, never, never. Not Jewish, Orthodox Jew, not Christianity. So to be so moved by the idea of three-person God would seem to me he's talking about a different God. And
mm,
we know in magic that the triple goddess is a big deal. The three, what is it? The crone, mother, child, mother, maiden, something like that. So there are trinities in magic and in the occult that we
hmm
probably don't know very much about. But it is an interesting poem in that it talks about it's John Donne after he'd found Christ. He started off as
mm,
as a philanderer, etc. Found Christ, and they're very powerful paintings, powerful poems rather. But he's talking about the force of God, break, blow, burn, the love that is. So it's almost enthrall me. It's almost an orgasmic sexual imprison me to your great love. It's a
mm,
very interesting connection. And what makes John Donne so unusual is that they're these deep primordial forces that he sees as his commitment or his being overthrown by the force of God. And remembering that this would not be a sentiment that Oppenheimer shared in any Christian way. I'd love to be
mm,
surprised on that, but I think there's no evidence whatsoever that he had a strong belief in Christian God. So, just
mm,
also, interestingly, there were three main women in his life, often at the same time. And he said that the Trinity, like the word Trinity doesn't even appear in that poem, but he says the Trinity comes from his connection with Jean Tatlock, who introduced him to a lot of literature, including John Donne. So there she is in the middle. And she died mysteriously in a bathtub in 1944, very young, age 29. I forget I forget whether he married Ruth Tolman at some point or not, but you can see obviously he was first married to Kitty, had affairs with these other women. I mean, really deep, long-standing affairs. But she died in a suicide that has been disputed even at the time. I'll tell you how she died, and you sort of think, I think we've seen this. It's one of those, there are certain pattern deaths that we see. So
mm.
she was found kneeling in the bath with her head forward, drowned. And she had a small amount quantity of barbiturates, in her bloodstream, but not enough to have made her not lucid. And it's
Mm.
not the first time I've heard of a ritual death in drowning a woman. Died leaning forward, leaning on your knees. How hard is that to even stay on your knees leaning forward to drown in a bath? Anyway, the suicide is disputed.
Well, of
Mm.
course, it makes sense.
Mm.
But well,
Yeah.
it's very odd. I mean, what's your working theory on this? If you want to get a little bit wild with it, do you
Well,
think perhaps it
only
was
that
a
the wildness is that the timing is interesting. So, okay, maybe it's all getting a bit awkward, these three women that he was playing off against each other. But maybe
mm,
1944 was a sacrifice, an adding to the magic that I'm thinking is at play in something
mhm.
associated with whatever was going on in Los Alamos was a magic ritual.
Something like yeah, that's what I was thinking. And also, a lot of these people do have to keep up their regular. If they're a part of the club, the sacrifices are kind of a pledge of allegiance in a way. Like I'm still on your
Yeah,
side. I'm working for you guys. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. That type of stuff, you know.
yeah.
And it's often demanded of them to continue doing these things. And
Yeah.
also for blackmail attempts as well. Is now we have this on you, therefore you can
Right.
escape us and that type of thing.
Yes.
But I do think these sacrifices, if not quite literally because of a religious reason, and I'm not talking about a good religion here, but I'm talking about a
Yeah.
sacrificial religion. It could just simply to venerate their own gods, but I think this is more of a like I said, paying your dues to the society.
Yeah.
Keep
And
proving that
also
you're
the
on our side. Yeah, go ahead.
seems to be at least one demand to literally kill, to sacrifice a person you love. So for
Yes.
many people, if you look at all of the Hollywood directors, actors, people in the music industry, their eldest son died in strange
Mm.
circumstances. Eldest son. So it has to be somebody you care about. It's not about, somebody that's some random person. This is a sacrifice of some that will really hurt to show your
Mm-hmm.
commitment.
Well, the payoff is usually extreme fame, and
Yes.
I suppose in death, ascension to godhood in the public eye. That's usually what happens, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
They're made an
Yes.
idol. They're made something that people look up to and venerate, and go down in the history books as a godlike figure in some respects. So there's
Yes.
benefits to this, and
So
usually they
many
live a very wealthy life while they're around as well. That's
So many people in the public eye, and remembering too, it's also how we always, especially with Hollywood actors, we think, oh, it's money and fame, or in politicians, it's money and wealth, money and power and fame. I think with a lot of artists, and I'm not talking about Oppenheimer as an artist, but who have this urge to create, have this desire to, we know how much how much money and investment goes into making a movie. I mean, it's the same of certain countries, GDP. It's just millions upon millions to make a movie. So somebody like Coppola wants to see his art produced. There's enormous amounts of investment. It's not something that could continue, working on his own in a barn.
mm,
So after this 1943, 1945, she also does a lot of bones things. And all right, we associate that in the Australian outback or the American desert. You'll find cow bones and they're not going to decay. They're going to just stay there on the surface of the ground for a long time. But this is on the left. I mean, it's hard not to see that as somehow associated with, something as bright as the sun, as the,
mm.
or as associated with the sun, the pelvis on the left. But it's interesting. Some people find these bones really beautiful. I find them really disturbing. I find them actually, in this case, I find also that her painting is not very good. That's really harsh because, as I said, I'm no painter. What do I know? How can I talk? But it's not. But it's pretty cursorily done. It's not especially skilled, and I don't think it's very moving or meaningful or whatever. But it fits into this narrative of being associated with this destructive force in the desert. So she was suspected. Eventually, the FBI caught up and said, "Hang on, what's this woman been going to Los Alamos all this time?" Not only did she go to Los Alamos, I think I didn't emphasize enough, she used to have hours and hours of conversation, just her and Oppenheimer. Is that odd?
Mm.
I don't think he was interested in art in the least bit. They might have been talking
Mm.
about literature, but for hours, I think he would have been a fairly busy person. But just to allow this woman to come in and spend just the two of them long conversations together was what was reported. Is very odd. And
Well,
so in
I have
1953,
have a theory or two, but I'll let you keep going first before
okay,
I
okay, well,
bring
yeah, I'd
my
be interested.
ideas in.
Okay, yeah. So the FBI, I'm just saying the FBI became aware because it was under such secrecy. It was really compartmentalized, this Trinity
Mm.
testing. So it was only in the 50s that the FBI think, okay, well, what's actually going on? Started to watch her mail. She was having a lot of visitors, frequent visitors of a foreign extraction to her house. So there's this myth that she was reclusive. It's really not true. She wasn't going to the openings in New York anymore, to gallery openings and that. She was very connected with the scene, but she had loads of visitors there, loads and loads of visitors. But they closed the file in less than a year, so that in itself seems a bit odd. That open and shut case, no, nothing weird going on here. And then in 1968, Life magazine put her on the cover. By this stage, of course, she's a mature woman, a senior age, and presented as this, back to the land lifestyle, and presented an ascetic loner, which she was not. She was very widely travelled and social networked, and some of the famous visitors to her home include Aldous Huxley, Allen Ginsberg, a few others, which were less kind of alarming. The Aldous Huxley is a pretty weird, why Huxley would go
Mm.
out into the Santa Fe, the desert, to see her, Mr. LSD, and Ginsberg too, of course, who was interested into very dark things as well as, drug culture.
Mm.
She knew loads of people in New York, including again Frank Lloyd Wright, who we know was a really, really horrific pederast and associated with all his incredible architecture, our ritual spaces. It's just, and she continued to be interviewed, right until she was, in her 90s. New Yorker, a New York Magazine, Interview Magazine. So really promoted. And let's go on a bit. I just want to take a sidestep now to what we're trying to sort of guess a little bit about what was really going on at Los Alamos. And remembering Jack Parsons, who was sort of working at a similar time period, actually, in a desert nearer Las Vegas. So he has more to do with Howard Hughes than this part of America, even though they're not very far away on a map. They are completely sort of isolated from one another. And remembering that Jack Parsons who's founder of the JPL, so the Jet Propulsion Lab, an early rocket scientist who developed solid state fuel. So he was kind of a self-taught odd person who had really advanced experimentation in rocket fuel. He was an overtly a member of the OTO, big disciple of Aleister Crowley. A lot of people say he's Crowley's, he was his main descendant. He was the person, not his father. He's his main
Mm.
disciple, let's say. And he was very interested in moonchild rituals to what he said was what is known as to birth divine feminine into the Antichrist divine feminine into the world, to usher in a new eon. So
Mm.
whether he was interested in going to space or not, I don't know. Not a lot is talked about there, but he was interested in these incredible explosive materials, rockets, and doing some kind of alchemical piercing of the veil. And can you see on the right there, Marvel Comics takes its name from him. So his birth name was Marvel Whiteside Parsons. Marvel Universe is named after Parsons. It just is. And
Mm.
most of his most famous rituals are called the Babylon workings, and that's how it's spelt, the Babylon workings. And the most famous ones were from 1945 onwards. He did work before this in the California desert, which is now Area 51. And remembering that on the 8th of July 1947, there were a lot of rituals by Parsons, and there was explosions at Roswell. And shortly after that, we have what is being reported to us as the Roswell UFO crash. So this is very odd.
Mm.
And this Roswell UFO crash, whether which narrative, I mean, there's so many going around now, but the one that was, the dark conspiracy that was going on at the time was, oh, it's aliens. They've broken through and they're giving us all this technology. So much technology came out after 1947, transistors, microprocessors,
Mhm.
silicon chip, all the basis for, all of the multimedia that we use today suddenly, I mean, not slowly, but suddenly were launched onto the scene. So this
Mm.
breakthrough, which may have to do with, homunculi, there may have been real alien, so-called alien bodies, has some sort of association with alchemy. I don't know whether there's any association, but Crowley died in 1947. He was in England, in Hastings, and he died in a really degraded state in a rooming house as a heroin addict, and absolutely ghastly, horrific man that he was.
Mm.
But this is just very interesting. There was no secret, no separation between Parsons, explosive experimentation and his complete dedication to thelemic magic. So much so that on every launch, whenever they would explode something, he and a team, but he was the main fellow, he would recite Crowley's poem, The Hymn to Pan. And
Mm.
Crowley saw himself as a bit of a poet, not very good poetry, but a bit of a poet. So all the other things he did, he was an agent for MI6. He was a he did so many sorts of other activities, horrific, sexual rituals and associated with many, many deaths and cruelty. But he also saw himself as a poet. And this hymn to Pan, I don't know. I think I might actually have it in a. Do I have it next? No. Is a literally a a praise to Pan, the god Pan, and at every ritual. So I'm now
Mm.
thinking about the Now I Am Become Death of Oppenheimer as not just like a deep, thoughtful, philosophical understanding of what the bomb meant, but I think part of a ritual.
Hmm. It's interesting,
And
Aleister Crowley. You said that he fancied himself a poet. He was also a very terrible painter as well.
I didn't know.
I've seen some of his paintings. I've made videos about them in the past, and they are so bad. They are
Yeah,
really
yeah,
cringy,
amateurish, really. Yeah.
awful,
Mm.
really bad paintings. But like the subject matter was equally as satanically Luciferian based cringe as you could imagine.
Mm.
It's like the edge lord of the early 20th century, and it's kind of what he's coming out with. Wow, it was just awful. Like it's not very
Yeah,
good. He was
interesting. I've
literally
never
a
seen.
loser. He was a loser in every respect of his life, is what how I like to
Yeah,
describe him. Just a really gross, pathetic man, I would say. Anyway, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Um, so Parsons is a real piece of work, but changed his name to Beleriand Amulus Al-Jal Antichrist. And he also chanted Enochian language. I mean, he was very well, as these people in these cults are, they're very well researched. And he was literally chanting John Dee's Enochian language. So there was an attempt to do something which, as I said, the sort of researchers can suggest, but because we're not Satanists, we don't have the agenda or agendas that these people have. We sort of find perplexing that this stuff is really serious at its high level, and it's about changing the world, changing humanity. It's not this kind of like, and then I'll get money. I mean, that's kind of base,
Mm.
witchcraft. This is much more about incredible powers at their disposal.
Hmm.
Here it is. There's the hymn to Pan. I tell you what, I've got his name in a minute, but William Ramsey of William Ramsey Investigates, who does wonderful podcasts and books, he does a good impersonation. He's heard Crowley's tape and Crowley speaking his own hymn to Pan. And Crowley, can you imagine? He's got this high, thin, creepy voice, and he goes, hymn to Pan. And it's just not what you expect from some sort of dark,
Mm.
seemingly powerful. He's just a very, very creepy guy, but the Ramsey stuff is very funny. But he's a serious investigator. And just remembering that Crowley he was involved in many sort of dark rituals, but the Boleskine House ones are pretty famous now. The ones in that house near Loch Ness, where he was doing Abramelin summoning rituals. And also, let's be clear, these are not, take a couple of days. This took years and years of following grimoires, like really set procedures that take years and years and tremendous amounts of energy from the person doing the rituals to produce what effect. We don't really understand, but these are major rituals. And he went back many, many times. Somerset Maugham's book, The Magician, is about is loosely, it is about Crowley's work at Boleskine House. And the house was owned by Kenneth Anger. We can't see his name in a minute, and Jimmy
Hmm.
Page. And it was destroyed in a fire. And thank you, UK Lottery, for restoring that special site. In 2024, they started restoration. But the site was chosen because it already had horrible things were happening there, including in the kind of 1500s of bodies came back to life and had to be reburied. And, it was always, as I said, these places that are a bit what we, if I say Skinwalker Ranch, people know the kind of
Mm.
bizarre activities that were happening, not just, the white lady ghost, hovering over the cemetery. It's a bit more than that.
So this is like the British version of the house O'Keefe decided to buy, where
I
she
think,
was.
yeah, I
Yeah,
think so. Yeah, I think
yeah,
so. There's that,
like a house
there's
that has
have
a
long
history of
histories.
darkness. Yeah, I get it.
Yes, yeah. Oh, here we go. Here's the reminding that this magic at this level is Goetian magic, and this is working from the lesser keys of Solomon, which you don't want to look at. It's horrible grimoire workings, which is Solomon telling how he was able to um, bring through, and he said control.
Mm,
There's 72 major demons. Well, it didn't work out too well for him, I can tell you that. And make
no.
contracts, make covenances, um, an incredible powers, not just, as I said, wealth and fame. And just
Hmm.
remembering too, this weird association between demonic and alien. We know that this is that drawing in fact, it's a sketch Crowley made in New York, interestingly, 1917 New York, of a figure he called Lamb, who looks exactly as what we would associate with grey alien, or I think in certain parts of Northern England they're called grey neighbours. They've again got a long history through time,
Hmm.
not just in recent times.
Yeah.
So, a little bit of a sidestep. I think most of your audience, because they're really smart, they're really thoughtful people, and they'll, if there's something that they're not familiar with, they'll go researching. But I just thought I'd drop in a couple of slides, a bit sort of cliff notes. But, we know that in the dominant futurist eschatology, that the idea that Christ did not return when he said, remember, he said he would return um, in his lifetime, in the lifetime of many of his disciples, etc. But this is the idea that most of the church, and I would say most of the Satanists, have been led to believe that revelation is yet to occur. That tribulation, we may be in tribulation, we might not, but it has yet to occur. What an incredible, what an incredible delusion that has been enacted by
Mm.
Satan. That to tell people that that it's yet to come, and instead of missing the fact that we're in Satan's little season now. So just a couple
Hmm.
of bits that I took from Jimmy Swaggart. These big churches are very full of this kind of end times, waiting for revelations. Whereas I think most of the people that we're sort of finding are really open to and starting to investigate and starting to understand that we may be in this little season where Satan's released for a certain amount of time after a millennial reign of Christ that has already occurred. We're still trying to understand that, trying to come to grips with it. But wow, does it explain a lot of things about where we are and the incredible rapid decay of kind of humanity that we occur now. And just again,
Mm.
for people who are not aware, I think I was just going to recommend that of your many, Paul Stobbs' many brilliant interviews and talks and so on, that Eddie Bravo one looked to me like a pretty good one for people who haven't come across your work yet. So I just
Mm.
showed that there to look up that one. And then, of course, there are other people who I like a lot. JT Follows JC, Jason Jack, Leaving Babylon. There are others too, but there's just some that I think I'll point people to if they haven't already discovered. And we're remembering that where we are now, where I think we are in Satan's little season. We don't know when the final judgment will be. It'll be at God's timing. It's unknown to everyone, including the fallen angels. But the fallen angels want to avoid the final punishment, which will be, well, I think, you know, de-existing. I don't know, falling into the abyss, however it is. But that as angels, fallen or not, they can indeed enter the courts of heaven. They have that right. There's a sort of a legalese about all of this that I still kind of trying
Mm.
to understand. But their children, when they mated with the human women and formed the Nephilim hybrids, and then multiple generations of that, are not children of God, and they're
Mm.
not ensouled. This is the way we're sort of understanding. We're just putting all this together really now. But they cannot enter the kingdom of God. The only way that they can is if humans act as vessels for these disembodied demonic spirits, and they will be the fallen angels' army. So the plan is, we have this from a few people, including the ex-mother of darkness, Jessie Zabota, about the highest level whistleblower that I think we've had. Um, their long-term plan is to storm the not well, first the camp of the saints, but to storm the kingdom of heaven with this massive army, Gog and Magog, whenever it is that God triggers the end time, the final judgment. And I think, another person I'd like to recommend, I love to recommend people's YouTubes or podcasts because it's a great way to get up to speed. And also then people can go off and do other research, buy their books, look more into the detail. But we're just so lucky in this era that as much as all we complain about and we're wary and quite rightly of the prevalence of mass media and AI, it has always been said that Satan would be defeated by a weapon of the air. I think this is it. I think this knowledge spreading, around the world, gathering, understanding, researching, is an amazing tool in our hands. So anyway, that's just a bit of where we are. Now let's go back to the story. So Werner von Braun, a Nazi Scientologist, member of the Thule Society, demonologist. And if you look on the left there, this is such a joke. You look at Reuters, you look at Snopes. Were they founders of NASA? Was Walt Disney? Did Werner von Braun? Did Jack Parsons? Did Crowley have anything to do with NASA? No. And then you go to NASA's website and you say, Jack Parsons was fundamental. Werner von Braun was fundamental in beginnings of NASA. Like, what a joke. They're just, it's such the misinformation that they try to send out there. But Werner von Braun, of course,
that
was
gaslighting again that they love to do so much. Like we mentioned at the start, isn't it? It's kind of
unbelievable. So remember, NASA is not a straight answer, or what is it? Not a space agency.
Well, and also I believe isn't NASA supposed to be deceive in Hebrew? I've heard or something like this.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. So
Whatever they're
and
doing,
also
it's
the
again whatever they're
logo
doing.
is also a serpent tongue. It's a forked tongue. Yeah, when
Yeah,
you actually look at
yeah.
it. So it's very, 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 on the NASA. We can go for hours about NASA, but
Yeah.
go ahead. I'll let you. I'll let
Yeah,
you
but it's
go.
not an innocent. That's right. And just
Yeah.
remembering that Parsons was close friends with Earl Ron Hubbard, again, a bit younger than Parsons, but Hubbard and Kenneth Anger were both acolytes of Jack Parsons and Crowley. And then you know how you just stumble on these things. And you think, how come not more is made of this? Does Van Morrison not look like L. Ron Hubbard? I mean,
Very
this is
similar.
just by the by. And I don't know, nobody seems to talk about it, but Morrison was a Scientologist for a while, but he left that. But phew. Okay, so remembering this quote from people who've been looking into what's called the secret space program and so on. They're aware of Arthur C. Clarke and the author of the book 2001, etc. He said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And what we always thought he meant, or I think what most people would assume he meant, was that, okay, you're holding up a mobile phone to somebody who's never seen a mobile phone and they think it's got magic in your hand. But maybe magic is indistinguishable from advanced technology. Where does this technology come from? It just doesn't come in these little, slow, gradual drips. It comes in this bang where we suddenly have, massive new technology that affects, society, it affects, the way of life. And it seems to come in bumps, even though we also often get the sense they're holding back. They're holding back newer technology until they're ready to release. But I feel as though, again, I'm putting forward this idea that somebody like him probably knows there is magic involved in producing advanced or releasing advanced technology.
Well, actually, it's
So,
funny. It's funny you bring this up right now because somebody just sent me an email literally like an hour ago, coming off the back of my recent live stream on the Understanding Conspiracy channel. And I said to him, just send me the information of what you were trying to tell me in the chat. I can't really do much about it right now. But if I could just get the email, this is fascinating. It's about technology specifically in the US laws that are actually on this. And he said here, there's a United States federal law um, which is designed to prevent the disclosure of new inventions and technologies that, in the opinion of selected federal agencies, presented an alleged threat to the economic stability or national security of the United States. The act is called the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951. Okay,
Wow.
so this is actually implying, and this is what he's trying to say, it's in conjunction with topics like aliens, Project Bluebeam, and disclosure, etc. And he says it corroborates a lot of what I was talking about in the last live stream about Bluebeam. And he says he's attached an article link here. Maybe I'll put it up in the description of this video as well if people want to go check it out. But the idea is that modern inventions have more likely been around for a lot longer than they're telling us, basically. And it's kind of what we have today is like a drip feed. So, for example, it says Nikola Tesla is credited with inventing wireless power transmission. So we use that to charge our phones today, don't we? Wireless charging. But we only just got that recently. But Tesla obviously created this technology decades upon decades ago, you know. And it's kind of, this is where it all comes in. Like the government quite literally is holding back technology from you, quite literally. And they are they're given like, it's like they give a narrative that it's organically being produced, you know, and there's a timeline you can look at of the development of technology, but really they've been drip feeding something that's already existed for a very long time, and they are
and when it's released, it's strategic. Strategically released. Yes. And also then we look back at all of those great, as I said, like with the Roswell crash and other, you sort of think, well, where was this technology coming from? I mean, we think back to this, you know, so many rabbit holes, but, you know, going back to Hitler and the seances and all of the information coming through about how to, you know, with weaponry and, you know, also social control. So Parsons became involved with, or after one of his rituals to invoke the divine feminine, she turned up on his doorsteps. I'm not sure she's anybody's, anyway, I'll be cruel, anyone's idea of the divine feminine, because she was pretty tough woman. And he thought of her as his avatar of Ishtar. And she was also an artist. I think, again, perhaps one step better than Crowley. I don't know. But there she's painted Parsons in one of his fallen angel,
Crowley,
in his own avatar.
Crowley was worse than that. I'll be showing pictures, by the way, so they'll be seeing what I'm talking about when I say Crowley was a terrible artist. This woman, by comparison, this woman is Salvador Dali himself or something. Skilled. By comparison, you know, this person actually, it's ridiculous. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. So just remembering her, and she's just on a kind of relatively recently, 2014, had a major survey of her work. I mean, it's really ordinary, really uninteresting. But you know, why is this person even of interest? It's because this. I mean, she was an outright, you know, called herself a witch, but this was a lot later, of course, than O'Keeffe. And again, like with Crowley, that saying that people feel as though Boleskine House left open portals, that the rituals were incomplete. These long years and years of rituals that took place were so laborious and so complicated. So they were definitely doing something, but leaving open doorways or you know, portals. And this is just one small version of that that's always been associated with Parsons, this Devil's Gate portal to hell that's in the territory in which he was doing some of his explosions. So we come to the idea of deserts. And now of course, we understand that deserts, you know, you're going to test explosives, you're going to test nuclear or otherwise, it's got to be in unpopulated areas. But we also sort of have other associations with deserts. So Area 51, what is now Area 51, which, as you can see top right, is blotted out on, you know, on Google Earth or NASA Landsat or whatever, is top secret, seemingly a weapons testing range. But we know now, I mean, it's really pretty open now, is on just the top level of a deep underground military base, like many, many levels deep. And so, again, we sort of this idea that what is the association between this high-level magic rituals, darkness, you know, seemingly alien presence, you know, all of the kind of experimentation, top secret experimentation that's going on there to this day. And we also know that apart from this sort of idea of testing in unpopulated areas, deserts have their own kind of biblical association, don't they? They are
Mm,
traditional ritual sites. And so that's the Mojave on the left where the JPL and then the Area 51 type stuff is going on. And the Trinity is, desert on the right. That's how barren it is. But remembering that the local people didn't go there, not just because, of course, there's nothing to eat, there's nothing, it's dangerously hot, there's no water, but they felt these places were haunted and horrible. And, only the shaman would go out there sometimes on
mm,
his mission of, journeying to find whatever for the tribe. So they see these places with respect and just stay away. But this is where all of this high level, rocketry is going on. Um, so she painted this in 1935, and I want to get onto an idea now that it wasn't just hindsight that she was painting the bombs after she knew what a bomb could do, but somehow she was involved in foresight. I honestly have become to suspect that most of her prior work allude to it's like almost a part of the plan of whatever was going on, we'll call it the A bomb, whatever was
mm.
going on in the rituals and explosions. So 1935, whether she knew Oppenheimer then or not, I don't know. And okay, another rabbit hole. I'll just leave this up quickly. But um, Samyaza is associated with being in the high places of the valleys of the earth, the desert valleys of the earth, and has been, remember, some of the worst of the fallen angels
Mm,
were thrown into, uh, they were locked into various places. The worst of them were chained
mhm.
until the final judgment. And Samyaza in particular is bound for 70 generations, says in Enoch. And again, just kind of recently, Tim Constantine of Sixth Sensory podcast just done some calculation. Now he's not being prophetic and saying, here we are, it's just around the corner, final judgment. That could be, but he's saying it's very strange because 70 generations of 70 from Jared's lifetime would be around about now. So some of these
Mm,
really large, powerful, horrific fallen angels are almost like due for release. Again, it'll be on God's timing for
mm,
sure, but it's very odd. And she painted a lot in this red, white, and blue. And first of all, you think, okay, American flag, red, white, and blue, as indeed British flag, Australian flag, New Zealand. I mean, red, white,
mhm.
and blue, every military, etc. But there's something about red, white, and blue that people tell me is really important in elemental magic, that they have very clear representational meaning for these colors, which then makes us think that the flags are, the flags are themselves chosen for as emblems of,
Mhm.
this magic. And, my goodness, I'm no expert in elemental magic, but I just wanted to point out on the right the Tibetan prayer flags. So the blues represent the sky, the white represents air, or in a lot of magic, it represents Lucifer. Remember, he is the angel of the air. The red represents fire. The green, which she hardly uses green. Bit of yellow represents the earth. But the idea of working with these elements is something that what they call the weather witches or the high level priestesses work with elements. And again, this elemental magic goes back a long way. So on the left there, that to me is like wow, like a sketch of air, isn't it? Isn't that what maybe is being portrayed there?
Mm.
And then on the right, fire. So these no longer just become about, her using up her pastels to create, beautiful, closely observed images of flowers, but rather capturing this kind of elemental magic about them.
You remind
The
me very
local,
much of the thought. Maybe I don't know if you know of Annie Besant and Ledbetter. You
yeah,
know these two,
the
yeah.
thought forms.
The thought
Yes,
forms very
they
much, very,
do.
very, very, very similar, in fact. And like I said, obviously the context is,
Ah,
oh, these are simply just flowers or representations of forms of flowers, but the thought forms was a
you're
very
right. Yes.
esoteric
Yeah.
practice of witchcraft, of
Hmm.
manifesting the ethereal imagery into the physical.
Yes.
a form of communication that's supposed to transcend human language, this type of idea. And in a way, it seems like she may have been practicing the same thing. And I can't
Yeah.
remember, are they contemporaries? When was that book published?
Well,
Uh,
it would be similar to Kandinsky and those other people, and
yeah,
there is some,
1901 it was
yeah,
published, the Thought Form book.
so,
So yeah,
yeah,
that same time,
for
yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
Yep, I hadn't put that together. You're absolutely right. I'm sure. Now, the local people in New Mexico, the Pueblo Indians, the other tribal people, called her a bruja, a sorceress. And
Mm-hmm.
they know what a bruja is. That's not that foreign to them. And they stayed away. They wanted nothing to do with her. And let's just be clear, if we call her a witch, we're not talking about a Wiccan dabbler. We're not talking about somebody who has spell pouches and,
Mm-hmm.
angel cards and what else do people have? What else do like witches when they do little love potions? And we're
Well,
talking about
we're not imagining cauldrons with Eye of Newt on broomsticks either. Like,
no,
it's not.
but
Yeah.
true. But I'm also thinking about, like they especially young women get caught up in dabbling in Wiccan,
Mm.
thinking it's all very innocent and just about nature and
Yeah, it's like angel
mm,
cards and divination and
mm,
star
mm,
signs and chakras and crystals, and it's
yeah,
very a new age spin on it, and then they make little pentagrams with candles and
mm,
intentional magic, and manifesting and all this type of stuff. It's quite an innocent form that you see quite mainstream
mm.
today. There's nothing innocent about any of it. It's got an innocent
No, no, it's very
veneer.
dangerous.
Yeah, it's all very
Yeah,
dangerous.
yeah.
But I think these earlier artists, Aleister Crowley was an outspoken one who was quite openly practicing witchcraft and proclaimed it to be so. But it does seem here that O'Keeffe was perhaps just doing the exact same thing, albeit in a more
Mm,
esoteric, occulted manner. And I think, and it's working I think you're going towards this, and we discussed Marina Abramovich in the last show. But I think this tradition of there being a resident witch to be involved with high influential members of civilization, society, and the occult is a practice that's been passed down throughout the generations, and perhaps in a way, O'Keeffe may be a precursor to Marina, or Marina is like a
mm.
predecessor
Yeah,
of. You know what I mean? In some ways, like this
yeah,
common
yeah.
practice. Um,
Yep,
she's definitely
yeah,
that's my working
yeah.
theory. But go ahead, you
Yeah,
tell
I
me
think
what's going on.
yeah, I think so. Well, I would use the word high priestess. I don't know what level. There's grand high priestesses, there's quadrant
Mm,
leaders, I mean, I'm not, they're very hierarchical and they grow up through the ranks, but we're talking about, trance divination rituals and summoning really large spirit beings that
mm,
require that the person conjuring, even at even some lower level of magic, they go through amazing amounts of self-cleansing. Believe it or not, they pray to God for protection because the spirits and beings that they conjure are so powerful and so dangerous that they are, they are frightened, but they'll also only come through because these spirits and deities hate humanity so much they don't want to have, it's like Mr.
mm,
Anderson in that in the Matrix, he just finds humanity disgusting.
mm.
And also interested in plant medicine. There is, and so wearing one cape does not a witch make. However, she did
No.
have a fondness for capes. She did. And so did Stiglitz. I don't think that, I mean, I know they were a bit more popular then, but I don't know. I just sort of thought that was funny that just as people can't wait to hold Crowley's wand, so somebody has on
Mm,
and always shows it to visitors, people can't wait to own these capes.
yeah.
Okay, and this one gets weirder though. This was her favorite stone. Now it was just in an article for Life magazine. I showed you that on the cover, just an interview and a bit of a promotion for her later in her life. And this is the stone, but my goodness, there it is in 1915. She's had it
Mm,
all this time. And I think I might have other. She was interested in collecting, stones and feathers, as we might, beautiful things from nature. But she kept this one and she said this was her favorite stone. And she'd had that for more than 50 years. And I can't help but think that there's more to that. And maybe also signaling, we know Life magazine was a Tavistock CIA promotional tool. It's not, you don't end up in Life magazine unless it's important for the narrative. we're remembering that Mormons were very, well, Joseph Smith had seer stones. So particular
Mm.
stones is him putting it in a hat and dictating the Book of Mormon. And I just again recommend Heidi Love on the
Hmm.
Unfiltered Ride podcast. Wonderful researcher. You'd know her, I think, too. But lots of
Yeah.
deep research into Joseph Smith and Mormonism because she's had very direct experience. And knows it
She was
from,
on my channel actually. I've interviewed her on Understanding Conspiracy, yeah, and she's told her
yeah.
story, been involved in all of that, and it's surprising what a lot of people don't really realize what's going on in Mormonism. Honestly, it's yeah, I was
Yeah, yeah,
shocked for some of the things I discovered
yeah.
from
I think
Heidi.
that's, and that's her platform really, is that the fact
Mm,
is, okay, people go into this, okay, it's hiding it from the general population who don't know that they're participating. The Mormons who are going to church, good Mormons, some of the best people, that she
hmm.
knows, and they don't know they're practicing Freemasonic rituals, that they're practicing necromancy. They just don't know that they've
No,
become something, part of something much bigger. So just let's look at O'Keeffe and Pharmakia, and having another look at some, not all, but a lot of the flowers that she painted. Turns out they're pretty well-known hallucinogenics. And
interesting.
I'm not an expert. And I mean, of course, I don't even know whether the ones that I haven't picked out may have medicinal, magical, hallucinogenic, psychedelic properties, but some just are. They just are well known. So petunias. Again, I'm no expert, so it might be the seeds of the petunia. Poppies, well, we know,
Hmm.
the heroin comes from poppies, and but so is this orris root of the iris flower. And I've spoken before in Klimt actually that blue
Yes.
morning glories, which just grow everywhere, are so hardy weeds. And they are used, and even in the 60s, it was a popular kind of hippie thing to do, to take morning glory seeds. Dangerous too, because dosage is not, it's not easy to control. And the results, and we probably know people who are casualties of that era who have,
Mm,
taken hallucinogens and just never been the same again. Absolute messes with their lives. But how many of these things she painted were hallucinogens? One in particular that she painted many, many, I think more than any other flower, was this, what she called white trumpet flower. That sounds nice and innocent. It's also datura. It's also called Jimson weed. It's really,
yes.
really well known hallucinogen. This is large now, 1 meter by 1.3. And can you see that these predate? She had started to go to the desert, but some of them were, she was still in theory living in New York. Now, the Jimson weed is mentioned a lot in Carlos Castaneda. Again, whether we take all of it as fiction or fictionalized non-fiction or what it was, but these are the books. This might be past your era. Did you ever go through a Carlos Castaneda reading,
No,
Faye? No,
no,
good on
but
you. You no
on
need to.
Jim's no on Jimson weed though somebody because I talk about psychedelics a lot on my channel, and that's not by the by, but someone sent me an email telling me their experience, and they basically ended up taking Jimson weed without realizing it, and they basically lost their mind, and it was extremely toxic, and they almost died as a result. It was like a delirium than anything, but the brain,
Yeah.
they were actively dying basically because of this
Wow.
overdose, and he just barely survived, and obviously
Ooh,
hospital and everything else. But I've heard about that one. Let's put it that way.
yeah.
That one is
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
joke. It's not a joke,
No.
Datora. It's actually like it is toxic. It's like
Dangerous.
it's very,
Yeah.
very dangerous. Yeah, but go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Carlos
no need
Castaneda. What
to,
have we got here?
yeah, no need to read these books, but it's associated with him because he talks a lot about using Jimson weed. Actually, Don
Mm,
Juan, the shaman that mostly Castaneda is working with, says to be very wary. He doesn't like Datura. In those Castaneda books, they're always talking about having peyote and meeting Mescalito, the deity
mm,
associated with. So there's also, I think, a deity associated. So he always talked about, Don Juan talked about the Datura as a she. She's a powerful of element, but she distorts them. She gives them a taste of power and makes them weak. And in Castaneda's own account of when he was taking this drug under prepared circumstances, I mean, these shamans knew how to prepare and how much to use, but he would always enter flying states, often go blind for a while, and heart failure and death are real risks. But associated
mm.
with flying, so astral projection, we might call it. And
Mm.
one of the buyers of one of O'Keefe's Jimson Weed paintings is the heiress for Walmart. And we know how dark Walmart is and their association with the tunnels and trafficking, human trafficking, etc. So I'm just saying, I don't go very much into the art market stuff, but just enough to know that other people know what these paintings are about, even if the museums don't ever follow a line like this to tell the
Mm.
casual viewer. So another tons of these Jimson weed. And Morning Glory, haha, shows up quite often, doesn't it?
It does.
So very destructive, very kind of out there. As I said, no longer very well painted. This is very cursorily painted in comparison, isn't it, of the detail of the other work
Mm.
she'd done. I'm just sort of reminding people that it was called the Manhattan Project, this secret project, and they made up a secret name, or we'll just call it after a district in New York, the Manhattan something or other laboratory. But just to say, all of the planning for these tests, whatever was going on at Trinity, was done in Manhattan where she lived.
Mm.
So predating the actual tests by a long time, but I think she was associated. This is my completely speculation, but I feel that there's gathering evidence that she was involved in the witchy part of all of this. She had
Mm.
meteoric success from a very early age, suddenly retrospective. Imagine that age, I don't know, 30 or something. Oh, that's retrospective. Yeah. You know,
Mm.
and I think that um, yeah, it was a bit amazing. At her death, her estate was valued at 70 million. And you and I know artists, barely make a cracker from what they do. And then, and then even artists who are very successful, 70 million. Where does
Mhm.
that money come from? And I have to just put it in perspective. It was only a bit less than Picasso was worth at his death. And we know
Mm.
he made three artworks a day. He was an amazing salesman. So you just think, what? I know it came from land, etc. as well, but it's just bizarre what accrued to her in that time.
Mm.
So I'm not the only person who thinks that maybe her art is a bit overrated. Not terrible, but so this is some of the reviews of a 1993 exhibition in London. Now notice that's in London. She's a bit of a holy cow in America, but the art critics like Commercial Illustrator, Limited Talents, the ambition to be remembered as Rembrandt, irredeemably amateur, made good monthly images on calendars, grossly overrated. I mean, they're really sticking the boots in, and these are respected critics. I'm not giving the silly ones. So they're pretty harsh, but they're obviously reacting to this overly sensationalized view of her. So let's just take a little sidetrack as we just remind ourselves that large explosions can often be associated with demonic presence. I mean, how else are we going to say it? Um, this one appeared over the World Trade Center, that face there. It's just odd. And people say, oh, it's just pareidolia, the human face. Humans will always find a face. But I love cats. I never see cats' faces in this. I see demonic faces. Oh, that's right. Oh, this is just a little side view that the September 11 was a ritual event. We know that it's not what it appears. It occurred exactly 11 years to the day after Papa Bush's New World Order speech.
Mhm.
And again, please, if people haven't come up with, William Ramsay investigates his books on Crowley, his books on September 11, on this obsession the dark cult has with the meaning of number 11, the fact that George Bush's wife was the son of Aleister Crowley. That's kind of just, I mean, Crowley had an affair with Paula, somebody or other, and produced this again. I mean, that's not a woman. Also happens to be Betty White's sibling too.
Mm.
So just a few more of those faces, and you can say, "Oh yes, we just find faces everywhere." Well, I don't find faces everywhere, but I really see them here, not just in not just in these chemical explosions, also in wildfires. It's just an odd occurrence, isn't it?
Mhm. It could be an overlap of the spiritual into the physical,
Yeah,
through
some
something
kind
as
of tearing.
through
Mm.
something as ethereal as, let's say, smoke.
And we
Which
always think about this as a release, don't we? Like an explosion is
Mhm.
a release. Is a breaking through.
Mhm.
So there's
Well,
even
I'm just saying the occult do live by the principle of as above, so below. So what happens in the physical is happening simultaneously in the spiritual and vice versa. So if there's an explosion in the physical, which you would say is the release of extreme energy, then something in the spiritual realm did just happen of equal comparison. The same
mm,
thing basically. So I mean, a lot of people look at these things and think of it in a physical, worldly way. We've
yeah,
learned through many years to understand that no, the world is actually an extremely psychedelically,
yeah,
spiritually charged
very
place,
weird
and
place.
things are happening that we do not understand on levels that we do not perceive ordinarily or comprehend. And I suppose what we're doing today is giving a glimpse into just how trippy reality actually can be in
Yeah,
many ways. And
yeah,
what these occult practitioners like O'Keefe were actually doing were playing with
yeah.
energy and
And
explosions,
people
you
like
know.
Crowley, Parsons, and Oppenheimer were consciously and were telling us they were associating these energy reliefs of
Mhm.
demonic energy with major explosions that they were apparently controlling. Whether they were controlling or not, it's another thing.
Mhm.
So volcanoes too have sometimes had this phenomenon. So this is the first detonation of the nuclear weapon, we're told, the Trinity test, 16th of July 1945. And again, I'm saying, what's odd is how much prefiguring O'Keefe's work. So 1941, where they hadn't made the test yet, it's as if that's either, the force or like the reflected light from this major explosion.
Mhm.
It's like it's almost like this magic brings this into being or allows this to come through. So a few more of her, as we said, kind of thought formy, kind of intense elemental magic. So I'm wondering whether she's right. O'Keeffe is saying that's not about erotic female, women's sexuality. Maybe she's right. Maybe there's something else, much more about this explosive creative force.
Mhm. Or perhaps if it is any reference at all to the female reproductive organ, it's about birthing something,
Yeah, yeah,
bringing
true.
something into the world. That
Yeah.
looks to me like an egg there as well, and the great
Mm,
cosmic egg. The birthing of
yeah.
something. I do feel like a lot of occult references and symbolism are just screaming out through all of this whole thing. And again,
Yeah.
I'm running off this imagined premise right now in my head that in a way she is the director of all of this that was happening in the region. She created the whole story, the whole narrative that they're going to make the
Uh,
public believe. And she was
mm,
painting things because she knew what was to come next in the story that she's orchestrating. It says, next, we're going to, you know, tell the public we've tested a bomb, and I'm
yeah.
going to paint these things as though I'm living in that time. So throughout history, people will look back on this for context and believe that everything was real. It's kind of, and
Mm,
that's witchcraft
interesting.
really is that witchcraft is creating narratives for people to believe
Illusions
to
and
control
yeah.
them. Yeah, to control them.
Mhm.
And if you can make somebody do something without ever actually meeting them or talking to them, then you are a powerful witch. Okay, you have
Yeah. Yes.
influence. You've influenced somebody through pictures.
Deception. Yeah.
Well, just
Mm.
through something as simple as sound, imagery, and
Hmm.
words and actions. You've influenced people to believe things that
Mm.
aren't true, and that's magic. In fact,
Yeah.
the whole entertainment industry is witchcraft. If you want to get down to brass
Yes.
tacks of what it actually is. And I'm not here to get all puritanical about it necessarily because I'm an artist myself. I'm not saying there isn't room for creativity from a godly perspective, but I suppose it's kind of in the wrong hands. It's a powerful weapon, and witchcraft is wholly in the business of using it to manipulate.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
artists like this who are memorialized as gods and goddesses after the fact, it's because they provide the correct contextual narrative for the agenda. So
Mm.
they want you to believe this is somebody who you should care about and who is going down in history as a profound creator of art to give us insight into that time period. But as you showed
Mm.
earlier, many real critics of art who will look at her work are like, I don't get why the
Mm.
hype is here. Like
Yeah.
she wasn't
Yeah.
that good. She
Yeah.
certainly wasn't
But
that
it's
good.
funny.
Yeah, go ahead.
But what? But God can sort of turn for good as we start to read back these images. We think, hang on, she was much more involved in this than
Mm-hmm.
right from the beginning, pre, way back, 1917, etc., in seership, in bringing through, in working under the direction of demonic forces. And we can
Mm.
actually, this is where I sort of say we can, rather than throw these artworks out, we actually gives us a lot of clue. We still don't understand. Of course, we don't understand how this ritual and magic takes place. Um, so this is odd. I just wonder, you're living out in the desert, all right, you pick up cow bones. Who gets hold of a skull? How easy
Mm.
or hard is it to get hold of a human skull? And she only painted from life. Honestly, she had flowers in front of her, mountains in front of her, bones in front of her. Where does an ordinary person get hold of a human skull? What how bizarre is that?
That is extremely strange. Um,
And
Suspect as hell. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and to the deep, the occult, this Skull and Bones has many, many references we won't go into now, but this the idea of, the Templars worshipping a skull
Hmm.
and this again, this birthing thing, as you mentioned, this egg coming through or this world being created. And then have a look at this. So Harold Edgerton was the photographer who first did high-speed photography. You know the pictures of like a bullet going through an apple or a
Mm.
milk splash. So he was able to do this incredible high speed. Nobody else had worked out the technology yet. But this was in the millisecond after the test. Isn't that an odd image before the
Mm.
actual kind of release of, flame and ashes occurred? It's almost like something either that you'd see, like you said, in a Dali, or kind of like a figure within a figure being birthed, a skull within a skull. Isn't it
Mm.
odd?
It looks like a
And
thought
I
form.
mean, yeah, and you can't to the naked eye see this. This is impossible. And it was
Yeah.
only Edgerton who was able to capture it.
It's funny,
So
go
a
back
little
there.
bit,
Just quickly,
yeah.
you showed the Skull and Bones
Mm.
logo. And this is just on a side tangent. People might not know this, but it's actually in two halves. It's a male skull and a female skull that's been joined together. Can you
Oh,
see
really?
yeah, so if you split it
Interesting.
straight down the middle, one half is male, the other half is female. And
Oh, how weird.
if you look at the femur bones that are crossed over, one's male and one's
Yes,
female.
they're different.
Yeah,
Ah, I
and that's
never.
what. And
Mm.
obviously, we're talking earlier about this known practice that they um, basically make male children females before birth and vice versa. So they will look a certain gender, but they're actually a different gender. But this is it's obviously a
Interesting.
practice, and this is about the combining of the masculine and the feminine to create the perfect being that isn't separated anymore. And there's a lot of worship of that within this culture, and
Yeah,
it's right there in that symbol. Funnily
interesting.
enough, you know.
Yeah, yeah, interesting.
Hmm.
So we'll go a little bit quicker through this, but it's just she started, she doesn't do much geometry, but she did these weird geometrical things. These are two separate paintings on the left. Um,
Hmm.
and she said that she bought this house in Abiquiu because the door of the doorway. And the doorway was odd because it was incredibly wide. I mean, a bit taller than human needed, but no, that's not so unusual. But it was an odd thing. And in the interview, she says, also a writer says, it's too wide for humans, too high for animals, too narrow for carriages. Who was it for? The gods. So sometimes these writers writing about her also know more than they're saying,
Hmm.
or they've stumbled on it unconsciously. But this weird fascination she had with these doorways, and as we know, doorways and portals are related, and remembering CERN and Shiva, the statue of Shiva at CERN. So we know that CERN is not just, I mean, the Large Hadron Collider, all, can act as a portal, can act as a
Hmm.
doorway. And one of the things, I think they're doing lots of things, but one of the things I'm sure that they're doing is to release, a major demonic and deities. And
Hmm.
stargates were been discovered for a very long time. You can see some in the Middle East. And they used to be reported on in newspapers, now not so much. And remembering bottom right there, that's the ziggurat of Ur, I think that is that the when they Americans invaded Iran, and just realizing that lots of the old statues of the gods show them coming through portals, coming through discs shaped doorways or portals. And this idea of bridging, which they say themselves, they're finding the God particle. They're somehow, that's what they say. CERN says, oh, we're finding the God particle. So this, again, this kind of alchemical prima materia. But what do they really mean by that? the capacity to make into this reality
Mm-hmm.
something of fallen angels. So according to this is official website, Atomic Energy Agency, there's over 30,000 particle accelerators in use in the world. So CERN, and there's a couple of other very, very large ones, but there are particle accelerators in use around the world. Coincidentally, the dark occult, we all remember that inauguration
Mm-hmm.
ceremony, don't we? That bizarre
Yeah, I remember
satanic.
that.
Phew. Um, I'll come back to. Uh, so this weird association between these rocketry and fertility cults.
Mm-hmm.
So space sex, and somehow, look, maybe again, I don't think they're doing one thing, just whether it's just about releasing demonic entities from where they've been, captured or chained into this reality, maybe, but maybe many other things. But one of the things is that they have obligations to worship. So this is bizarre to us, but there are covenants that go on that have to be maintained. And even a Hindu worshipper will say on a small level, if you don't keep worshipping the small gods in your house, terrible things happen. Well, on a larger scale, you have to keep giving, ritual sacrifice, glory to these gods that you have contracts with, like, Ishtar, Semyaza, even if they are locked up somewhere. And I mean, my goodness, look at the Virgin Tesla symbolism, that
It's all
bizarre. We won't
very,
go in.
very much on the nose,
Very
isn't
sus.
it?
So this thing about, and remember, Parsons was trying to bring into this reality an aspect, a particle of the divine feminine. And he might be a lot of things. I don't know whether we're onto Elon Musk 2.0, 3.0. No, I don't know who this guy is, um, but one of the things people say when they interview him, one of the things he's not is genius. He's not that smart. We know he's just what they call a lifetime player. He's got a role to
Hmm.
play. So like Zuckerberg has. So not that many people know this, that the dam under Area 51, Nellis Air Force Base, I think there's another Air Force Base too, because this dam is huge. Its code name is Mars.
Hmm.
So now we sort of think when they keep saying occupy Mars, get to Mars, we're all going to go to Mars, we must go to Mars. What are they really meaning? Maybe it's not the idea of some planet. And in fact, so far, I don't think they've got to Mars. They always seem to end up in Bulgaria or Algeria instead. So these are official photographs that were released of Mars, NASA photos of Mars, that people have then gone and found in, often fairly dry countries in the Middle East or Eastern Europe. I mean, it's just bizarre. They're not, it's just they're just using these places as a stage set. And on the right, you might remember this one that was a few years ago where,
Hmm.
um, this painting, this graffiti on the ground, and Elon Musk going, "Ha ha, it's actually true." Yeah, you believe him. And just reminding people too that the ziggurat of Ur, this is just standard archaeology, standard. This is not not going out there and speculating. There would be a temple at the top of the ziggurat. And remembering that the walls of the ziggurat had been rebuilt by Saddam Hussein, but the mound was there was a structure there, and it led up to a temple at the very, very top in which a maiden would sleep overnight with the gods. This is associated with fertility, but also death and rebirth. I don't know what happened to the maiden. I don't think it was good. But this is standard archaeology. It's very like what I've understood happens in Mormon temple too, the big Mormon temples. There is a sex room,
Hmm.
and we'll leave it at that. It's just. But when the US invaded, Iraq in 2010, the first thing they did was went to the museum, stole lots of objects, but they were looking for words. They were looking for the incantations, the frequencies, the
Hmm.
spells. And now it comes to that thing, as you're saying, with the thought forms, that there's an association between sound
Hmm.
and image. So again, something non-material being figured in the real. And these are just somebody has done some research on some of the spiritual gates.
Hmm.
Coincidentally, we're told by some of these upper level, whistleblowers who've left the system that there are 30,000 spiritual gates on the planet, and the plan is that the dark ones want to do is when God triggers the final judgment, they want to open all of these 30,000 gates at once And they've been trying this for years. Can you imagine how hard that is to coordinate? But
Mm.
now with AI and Hadron Collider's, they feel that they're getting very close. And
Mm.
remembering that, again, this is a bit of an oldie, but Hillary Clinton requesting the documents pertaining to the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, who
Mm.
was from Uruk. So what do you
Interesting.
think? What are these politicians looking for? What are they trying to access there? I think spell cancelling is much more overt now, and it's not the only. I'm sure stuff happens in secret. Oh, absolutely, but we're seeing it more and more openly, aren't we? And in
Yeah.
music videos, very often, and Super Bowl and so on. But I had my own little Mandela moment because I didn't watch the Eurovision in 2019, but somehow or other I saw a clip of Madonna singing this song. Not everyone's going to come to the future. Not everyone's going to last. And I'm sure she's saying not everyone's going to go to Mars. And as she does that, she points. Everybody else does too. But she's really, that in tribal cultures, you never point at someone like that. That's a point of death. You do not point like that. It's not just rude. It's casting a death a spell on a person. And she's going around the
Mm.
room saying not everyone's going to make it to Mars. And now when I look up the lyrics, on the internet, there's nothing about Mars there, but I'm sure I heard that.
Maybe. I mean, I don't watch the Super Bowl. I'm British myself. I don't really care much for
No,
that. But I have seen the odd. It's always a fun show when you do watch the
yeah,
halftime
when you
show.
see
That's
the
for
clip,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Did that whole Mars thing you're telling me about? That's kind of blown my mind a little bit because it seems like a tongue-in-cheek reference to you guys aren't going to get to go to the bunker, but we are.
yeah,
It's that
yeah,
kind of thing, or maybe a
yeah.
covert message of like, guys, you need to start coming to the bunker. You need to come to Mars. Time's almost up. Could be like a coded
Yeah,
message of some kind, from
it's
Elon there.
true. And in a way, it reminds us, we're still sort of trying to understand what is the cosmology, but I think we're really coming to doubt this idea of these, planets hung in a row, in the sky.
Mm,
If these people could leave Earth, they wouldn't bother with bunkers. Do you know? They wouldn't
no.
be planned. They cannot. They're stuck here. There's some sort of firmament or trap or limitation to where they can go. And if they can escape through this underground, deep underground military base that has something, it has a key, stopping station, or it is itself massive world down there, or it leads to a world beyond the ice world. I mean, again, who
Mm,
knows? But this is really this obsession with Mars, and yet it's the same time it's a joke, isn't it? Martians are little green men. We've always been
mm.
told it's a joke, haven't we? It's conflicting information. So that's about all I have really, but just
And the way she's dressed there as well, which seems like a style she seemed to adopt quite a lot in her later
mm,
life, is very much like the Korean shamanism of the Mudangs. She's dressed very similar to the
mm,
Mudangs of Korea, and they are intermediaries between the spirit realm and the physical realm. That's their
mm,
job, and they get paid to do that in their culture,
mm,
and perform rituals and cut themselves and do all sorts of things. So she's dressed identical to one, the hat and everything. And the hats I've
yeah.
found is actually a very
Is it?
common motif in shamanism. They
Ah,
always have a hat without fail. And it's usually a
wow.
wide brimmed one across many cultures.
Ah,
So she's
ah,
given me loads of red flag hints here that she's definitely
yes.
basically a modern day shaman of sorts who was overseeing, if not involved with heavy hitters and movers and shakers involved in a giant
Mm,
invocation ritual in the dry places of the deserts to try and summon
mm,
something.
mm,
Maybe
mm.
that's just me. Maybe I'm just a crazy Christian conspiracy theorist. Who knows? But
Well,
oh,
I'm
yeah,
also just trying to argue for people to understand that when we use the word witch, we're not talking about Middle Ages,
no.
wise women herbalists. We're not talking about young girls doing love potions. We're talking about something really powerful, really elemental, that may be way more powerful than, 10,000 bolts of TNT
Mm-hmm.
or the splitting of an atom. That's something that is absolutely, I mean, she was really focused on her role,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that was. And I think when she's sort of in photographed by Bruce Weber, who's a very famous fashion photographer. These people signal to one another. There is an elite class who may not be directly involved in the work she's doing, but they know exactly what she's telling them, and you often telling them, where the next ritual will be or what's going on.
Hmm.
So they signal to one another through magazine covers, especially, we understand. And, the high level witches, the high priestesses, are people like Gloria Vanderbilt, Joan Collins. They're quadrant leaders. After Gloria Vanderbilt died, there was the contest between Meghan Markle and Beyonce won. So Beyonce's taken over the Eastern Quadrant. And you remember soon after this occurred, there was this famous meeting where on a line as when Meghan and Harry were going past Beyonce, and Beyonce very, very generously says, "Hello, my princess," because she'd lost. Meghan Markle had lost the witchy battle, and
Mm.
Beyonce had won. And, this stuff is real, but it's also telling the world, it's telling everybody in the network. They don't get on the phone. They don't have a newsletter. They know what to look for out there.
Hmm.
So there's art for us, is what I'm saying. There's magazines for us, and we read, as you say, the exoteric level. And if we just stop there, we're fools. We're not understanding it. There's a whole communication going on. Just as we've learnt to read symbolism, we've got to
Hmm.
learn to read their methods of communication, I think.
I think we're giving glimpses today and in our presentations we're doing here.
Mm.
And again, we don't want people to get confused with what we're doing exactly. And we're not anti-art necessarily,
No, not at
but
all.
what we're
I,
trying to say is that the ones that have been put in front of us that we're supposed to venerate are highly questionable when you actually just dig a little bit beneath the narrative we've been given. And that's kind of what we're
mm.
doing here.
And art has a purpose. Art has a role beyond
Hmm.
just the aesthetic that we're told is meant to be just enough. Mm.
Absolutely. That's right. It's not just a
Yeah.
pretty picture, there's far more going
No.
on. Thanks for doing this. This was great. I think the audience are going to get a lot from this presentation. And again, I don't want, there's very much a sense, I think, from our first show, people didn't get what we were doing because we had an audience that was
Mhm.
outside of the usual sphere of conspiracy, And I think they thought like
Mm.
we were kind of attacking
Yeah.
the greats as though
Mm.
we weren't worthy of giving such commentary, or they are beyond reproach because they are no longer with us, perhaps, or we are just too ignorant in our understandings to appreciate art and the level of how wonderful they were. And it's kind
Mm.
of, I mean, I think people need to realize what we're doing here. Like I said at the start, you will not hear in the books or by your lecturers or
Mm.
by the curators. Like they're not going to tell you these things. That little white box next to the painting in the gallery will not tell you what we're
Mm.
talking about today, because
Mm.
we're coming at it from a different context. And I think it's a context we want to encourage more people to kind of understand. Is that there's a whole world of language and symbols out there heavily tied to the occult that it bleeds through these greats and these classics, so called. So that's my takeaway. Is there anything you want to do as a final statement to this
Well,
one? And
yeah, I
go
think
ahead.
art is really important, and I wouldn't bother talking about any art that I didn't find value in, and that's the whole point. But art will also tell us about the world, the things that we couldn't see, we weren't sure about. Will give us clues, and that's why I'm reading back from her seemingly innocent work into something there's obviously something else going on. So we could apply
Mm.
that kind of like process to many other kinds of works. And it's not just to look for the dark and nasty. This is the powerful and extremely skilled, use of, demonic information, or accessing demonic technology, perhaps is a better way
Mm-hmm.
of saying it. Mm.
Absolutely. Well, there we go. Thanks again, Susan. Great
Pleasure.
talk.
Good to see you.
We'll definitely have you on again in a few weeks' time to do the next show. I should have this released maybe in a week or two from our conversation today. I'm actually got a big backlog now of like shows I've got to edit
Great.
because I've had lots
Mm.
of
Yeah.
visiting artists on and guests and things. So it's, I think the channel's doing quite well. What do you think? You think it's going
Mm.
well? I think it's good.
Fantastic. I'm really pleased. I loved Chris. It's Christopher Gardner, isn't it? I loved his presentation. Just fabulous.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's
really
about
great work.
building
It's
domes.
just
Yeah.
great to see an artist, an artist is someone who's curious about the world, he keeps exploring and curious and wants to make the world a better place. This is what an artist is. Mm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, he's a great example. Yeah, if people
Yeah.
listening haven't heard that already, a great interview with a guest artist, Christopher Gardner. Goes by Biocharisma Podcast. He has his own podcast, and he builds domes for a living. But how he got there, he is not an architect.
Mm.
He is an artist through and through, and very passionate man. But we'll leave it there. Thanks for doing this, Susan. We'll get you on soon.
Pleasure.
And as always, God bless.